This is another very large city. The first thing we can see is a very large river flowing through our city. We can also very quickly see that industrial areas are surrounding the city, especially on the north. We can see the city is almost completely industrial. We can also identify a port area just next to the river. There are also some very large parks in our city, again around the center. And these industrial areas and parks almost leave us the city center. Of course, this is also a very huge area. And we can, even from this distance, see that there is a very clear homogeneous urban texture. The colors of the roofs from this distance are almost identical. And if you would be zooming in, also the heights of the buildings will be very similar to each other. So very homogeneous texture. And our city, Paris, as you know, has been the subject of paintings. We see a few of them, a few more. And actually, we should be wondering about that. Why, at that time in history, Paris was a center of culture, center of art. So we are talking about end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century. So Paris was the capital of culture all around the world. So was this a coincidence or did something trigger that? We'll be discussing that later, but it's worth thinking about it. Paris is also the birthplace of some novelties at that time, something we are very used to today. Actually, these cafes or cafe culture. You don't go to a cafe just to eat and leave very quickly, but you go there to meet people, to watch the passers-by, to spend time. And in a way, that way of experiencing city life was invented in Paris. And this was one of the most famous cafes of the time, Cafe Tortoni. And beyond being the cultural or fashion center of the world for a period, again, end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, Paris was literally the center of the world for a couple of hundred years. And this red line running through the city indicates that. And actually, it is even, this is the location of the red line, and it is even indicated in a building. And we will be talking about that later, but again, you can think of it. The literal center of the world and what it means. Okay, now we come to our questions. So, that area is obviously, if we remember the previous larger images, is the center of the city. But where is the historic center? How did the city grow? Where did it start growing? This time it's a little bit harder to find out because the urban texture is very homogeneous. So still you need to make some suggestions, and you need to base your suggestions on some findings. The second question, you need to identify the growth pattern of the city. So how did our city grow? Remember London, it was growing in a linear way. Streets were projecting out of the city center, and over time these streets were being built up. Actually, the buildings would be built just along the streets, and then the areas between these main streets would be filled, and then the same pattern would continue, and we discussed that a lot last week. Here we have a completely different growth pattern, and actually there are some clues about that. So find the growth pattern of the city. Our final question for this week, you need to define the urban characteristics. So what can you say about the characteristics of the urban form? How can you define it? And to help you a little bit, I give you two more images, detailed images. And actually, if you wanted to, you can go ahead and open a map of Paris. and look to the details as much as you want. Okay, see you Monday.